Hey, what's going on, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be doing my mock draft 2.0. This is going to be a mock draft with trades. Now, I'm not going to have a hyper realistic or like a crazy mock draft with 20 trades and having like the Chiefs go all the way up to number one. But I'm aiming for around 4 or 5 trades. And then the rest of the mock draft will just be standard, what I think the teams are going to go with, what I think they're going to go with. And so let's already get started. Having CJ Stroud and Bryce Young go 1 and 2. You know, these are the Vegas favorites. Everybody has them going 1 and 2. It makes sense for both teams, schematic wise. There's not much explaining to do. These are just going to be the number 1 and number 2 overall pick, unless something drastic happens, like Bryce Young goes number 1. But I think my first trade that I'm going to make is going to be with the Indianapolis Colts. They don't want Anthony Richardson slipping out of their midst. Now, unrealistic trade, they're not going to trade their second, third, and fourth, or they're going to have some different compensation like next year's fourth. But as long as it gets through, that's all that matters to me in the simulation. So I'm going to go with Anthony Richardson, their Colts' new head coach. Steve Steichen, who was the Eagles' offensive coordinator, had a very, very good year with Jalen Hurts. Can you repeat that with another athletic quarterback in Anthony Richardson? Hey, we don't know. And then the Cardinals are going to go with Will Anderson Jr. Now, this probably is how it would have ended up if the Colts didn't trade up. But do the Colts really want to risk a team going all the way, giving maybe a first-round pick or a first-round pick in 2024 to go get Anthony Richardson? Hey, you're running that risk if you stay there at 4. But moving on to the Seattle Seahawks, I have them taking Tyree Wilson just because I don't think they're going to end up taking Jalen Carter, having some, character concerns coming out of Georgia, was involved in a street race that ended up in the death of one of his teammates and a trainer. And then his pro day came in 9 pounds overweight, was not able to finish his workouts. So he's going to slip in the draft. Even though he is my highest rated player, he's probably going to slip in the draft due to that character issues. And he's going to continue to fall as I think the Lions go with Christian Gonzalez. They don't have great future, or they have such a great future, good offense, and they're building up that defense. So keep on building up that defense. They had a bad secondary last year. They signed Cameron Sutton this year in the offseason, Emmanuel Mosley. They have Jeff Okudah still. But go get Christian Gonzalez, who is an athletic freak, who is in the 99th percentile as a relative athlete. RAS score that's out of 100% athletes. 9.9 means he's in the 99th percentile. He also has great height and weight. At the combine, he was 6'1", 197. Ran under a 4.4. Has great fluid hips. Has solid footwork. Can play both man and zone. So I really like that selection for the Detroit Lions. Moving on to the Vegas Raiders. Going to have them going with hopefully their quarterback of the future. They have Jimmy Garoppolo. They can opt out of his contract for 2 years. Jimmy Garoppolo is a bridge quarterback for hopefully your quarterback of the future. And could that potentially be Will Levis? I don't have him graded that highly. I think there are just massive red flags with him. Couldn't beat out Sean Clifford, who nobody sees as an NFL quarterback at Penn State. Didn't play his sophomore year. Transferred to Kentucky. Had double-digit interceptions in his first year starting with 13. And then last year he had 10 interceptions with 35 sacks, which kind of led the SEC. Now Kentucky's offensive line, not a good offensive line by all accounts. But if you watch the film on a lot of those plays, he could have gotten out of a few of them, but he just squatted in the pocket, and I don't like that. So gonna have him going at 7. You're gonna have him needing to sit for a year or 2, but with that elite arm talent, could Josh McDaniels coach him up if he's not gone by the next year? But this is where I see Jalen Carter's free fall off. I think Atlanta, they just need defensive linemen so badly. They have Grady Jarrett, who is their only producing defensive lineman as of right now. And they just need somebody who generates more pressure and who's better in the run game. And you probably get the best player in the draft at 8. And moving on to the Chicago Bears, going to have them drafting Paris Johnson Jr. I don't have him as my number 1 tackle. I have him as my number 3 tackle behind Broderick Jones and behind Anton Harrison. But I think Paris Johnson Jr. is a good fit for this team. They do a lot of power runs, especially with Justin Fields. And Paris Johnson Jr. was really good at Ohio State. He was a tackle for Justin Fields. No, he didn't play his freshman year, sorry. He didn't play his freshman year, but in the last 2 years, he was blocking for C.J. Stroud, who went at number 1, and kept him clean for the most part. Has good technique and offers a good amount of size, so I can see him going top 10, especially for a team that has had such a good offseason so far in the draft. Maybe a little bit of an overhyped offseason, but you get your wide receiver 1 in DJ Moore, and now you got your offensive tackle 1 in Paris Johnson Jr., and you already have your quarterback 1, so yeah, that's a very good offseason for them. Moving on to the Eagles, I have them as another trade down destination. Their biggest needs aren't necessarily, their biggest needs just aren't necessarily at 10. Their biggest needs is what? An edge rusher, safety, linebacker, and those are all back half of the draft. So we could maybe a team like, I don't know, if a team really, really, really wants one of these top cornerbacks, they could maybe go up and trade him. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have the Washington Commanders trading up with the Eagles. Sorry about the unrealistic, weird trade. But the Commanders, who I think really could benefit from a good cornerback, going to go with Devin Witherspoon, elite man coverage cornerback out of Illinois who packs a punch and who can definitely lay the wood. And he's a good fit for the Commanders. They run, with the Ron Rivera scheme, they run a good, healthy balance between man and zone, which I think is good for Witherspoon, even though he thrives so much in man and coverage. Probably, you know, it would also be a really fun fit with him. Houston runs they're gonna run a lot of cover too, so that would be fun. But I think it's a good fit for the Commanders. Devin Witherspoon's top 10 player for me, so I like that there. Moving on with Tennessee, this is a place where I'm debating two positions. I think Broderick Jones is a good slot for them as well, but I don't think you should pass up on Joey Porter Jr. Tennessee Titans don't really have good cornerbacks. They haven't had them for a while. Your first-round pick in 2020, Caleb Farley, has just not worked out, has always been injured, and played special teams last year. So you're good, and you really need cornerback. And Joey Porter Jr. is a guy who offers, once again, 97% athlete. He offers a crazy amount of length at 6'1". He has an 84-inch wingspan, or 82-inch wingspan, which is higher than Peter Skronsky, who is their 16th overall player. So he's got a longer wingspan than some offensive linemen. He sticks in the receiver's hips, which is very good. And he's another really, really good man cornerback. So I like that selection for the Tennessee Titans, who are in, now have to deal with Bryce Young. They have Trevor Lawrence. So you're going to need some good secondary pieces there. Oh, and now they have Anthony Richardson too. But moving on to the Houston Texans. This is a difficult draft selection here because I think Quentin Johnson probably fits the best with maybe a guy like Bryce Young who should target a big body receiver. Didn't really have one at Alabama. He had Jameson Williams and John Mechie, who were his two leading receivers in 2021 when he won the Heisman. So hasn't really experienced a big-bodied receiver like that. And Quentin Johnson, who was somebody limited by his quarterback last year, Max Duggan didn't really put it where it should have been, where Quentin Johnson most of the time had to catch balls like this. He had to catch them like this. Meanwhile, they got to be here. Like if you're 6'3", 210, those balls should be here, like Justin Herbert puts them for Mike Williams. But also, they could go with a guy like Jackson Smith-Njigba, who profiles as an excellent NFL slot and who always creates separation, had 1,600 yards in 2021. But I think fit-wise, I think it's best case scenario for either one of those players, either Jackson Smith-Njigba or Quentin Johnson. I would not be mad if they, took either one of those players. I think they both work out with Bryce Young. Moving on to the New York Jets, this is where I have them taking offensive tackle. So apparently they're not going to trade the 13th overall pick with Aaron Rodgers, which I think is a huge, huge bargain. They're going to end up trading a second this year and then probably a second next year. That is a conditional where it turns into a first-round pick if they make the playoffs. But Broderick Jones, this is my number 1 tackle in the NFL draft. He's athletic at 5, or in the 95th percentile for tackles. He allowed 0 sacks last year for Georgia, allowed only 1 pressure. You know, he is a guy who probably has top 3 technique at the tackle position. I would probably have him, and then maybe Anton Harrison, and then maybe Darnell Wright. But Darnell Wright plays he plays right tackle. Broderick Jones is left tackle. It's either him or Harrison that has the best technique, and I think Broderick Jones gets out into space, into the second level, better than Anton Harrison. So really like him for the New York Jets scheme as well. He's also a scheme fit for the team. Now, he won't be starting year 1, or if he does start year 1, Dwayne Brown will likely be forced into retirement. But they do have that contingency with Dwayne Brown if Broderick Jones, needs 1 year. But that's a great tackle for the future. Moving on to the New England Patriots, I'm going to go with my favorite wide receiver in this draft with Zay Flowers. Really loved Zay Flowers' film. He's a special athlete after the catch at 5'9". Even though he has some concerns about his height and weight at 5'9", 182. He's not 177 bulked up for the combine. He consistently bailed out his quarterback at Boston College. And consistently had 50-plus touchdowns where he really should not have made some of the plays that he made at Boston College into touchdowns. Now, I have my film review out on him. It's currently on my YouTube channel. I think I'm making this video the same day that I did his film review. So the video will be out on the 1st of April. So definitely go watch that video if you want to see Zay Flowers in full display. Really love him. And then for scheme fit, Bill O'Brien traded for Brandon Cooks. And, he has had success with smaller receivers. Brandon Cooks, a 5'10 guy, had over 1,000 yards with him and Deshaun Watson. Moving on to Mac Jones, Zay Flowers definitely improves with an NFL quarterback. And I think he gets 1,000 yards potentially off the bat at New England. Moving on to Green Bay, I think this is a pretty easy Dalton Kincaid pick. I really think that if Jordan Love really wants to have a good year and a breakout season, you got to have a number 1 tight end for him. And Dalton Kincaid could fit in there right away. Young quarterbacks love to target tight ends, and with Jordan Love's freshness into the NFL, he's going to want to have a good target within 2 to 5 yards and a good check down, reliable player. So gonna go with Dalton Kincaid there. My tight end 1. This is a very good tight end class. Michael Mayer, potentially a first-round pick. Darnell Washington offers incredible versatility as a blocker and a pass-catching tight end. Musgrave is like the Anthony Richardson for tight ends. But Dalton Kincaid is probably separate from all those guys as the number 1 tight end in this class. Moving on to the Philadelphia Eagles, they traded down a bunch. And so going to end up taking Lucas Van Ness as the edge rusher out of Iowa. Now, Eagles definitely need defensive linemen the most out of this draft because they lost Javon Hargrave. They do have Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick, but Hassan Reddick plays super far outside. He doesn't really play in that 5 technique just because he's just not big enough to play in the 5 technique. Meanwhile, Lucas Van Ness could immediately hop into that 5 technique area and play and be like a 2-down lineman or even be a 3-down lineman. Now, he is another guy with great height and great length at 6'5", has an over 80-inch wingspan. If you saw him play against a guy like Peter Skronsky, he was bullying him with his superior length. Now, I think he offers probably the most as a pass rusher, maybe not as much as a run defender, but he's not a bad run defender. He's a good one, but I would not put him up with the great run defending edge rushers like a guy like Myles Murphy or Will Anderson or Jalen Carter. Moving on to the Steelers, this is probably offensive tackle area. Where's Anton Harrison? There you are. I'm going to go with Anton Harrison. This is another guy who is not a spectacular athlete. I think Broderick Jones, who is my offensive tackle 1, is a far better athlete than Anton Harrison, but Anton Harrison is a really good guy with technique. He's great technique at the position where he's not going to allow a lot of pressure, and he's going to open up a lot of holes for your team. Another big guy at 6'5", 315, and like that selection for the Steelers, who need better offensive linemen. They really didn't address that position as much as I wanted to as much as I wanted them to do the last 2 years. Meanwhile, you got Najee Harris, who's inefficient and who needs to get, he needs to get out into space more. And then, you got your rookie quarterback where you need a blindside tackle for Kenny Pickett, who's coming in his second year. So I like that selection for the Steelers. Moving on to the Lions, they took Christian Gonzalez within their first pick, and now this is a selection where I think you can address, if you want to go with a defensive lineman, or whether you want to go with, they probably take a linebacker in the second round. I'm gonna end up doing a 2-round mock draft, but let's go with Myles Murphy here. Now they drafted in the first round. Why am I forgetting his name? Aiden Hutchinson. They drafted Aiden Hutchinson second overall last year to address their 5 tech on the right side. They have James Houston on the other side, who plays an extremely good 7 tech and who's a third down pass rushing defensive lineman. I really like that, but what about those other 2? So we're going to have Myles Murphy split with James Houston on the outside on the left side, because Myles Murphy is a great run defender, offers another guy with great length, 6'5", 270, what was he at the combine? 270 flat or something like that. But so you're going to have Myles Murphy for 2 downs, solid. He can even bump onto the 3 tech due to his length, and you could have James Houston rushing on the 5 or the 7 tech on pass rushing downs. Moving on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this is a place where I think they would love to have a good quarterback on the board, because they have Baker Mayfield and then Kyle Trask next to him. So they're extremely thin at the quarterback position. We could even maybe see them tanking next year for Caleb Williams, Drake May. But as of right now, I think they need to go with secondary a lot, because they lost. James Murphy Bunting hasn't re-signed anywhere, right? But they did re-sign Jamel Dean, but they definitely didn't have a lot of versatility. Now, Deonte Banks didn't do the combine. Or no, sorry. What am I talking about? Deonte Banks did the combine, and he was extremely exceptional. And as a guy at 6'2", 205, he looked pretty good flipping his hips when he's doing those combine drills. But I definitely need to do more tape on Deonte Banks. But from what I've heard, he's a very, very good cornerback out of Maryland. Moving on to the Seattle Seahawks, have them going with offensive guard O'Cyrus Torrence. Why is he 49th on their big board? What? O'Cyrus Torrence, I have him as a top 15 prospect in this draft. Really like him out of Florida. Big tackle, or big guard, sorry, out of Florida, 6'5", 315. Moves like okay, but he's got better IQ. He definitely knows his angles. He definitely knows how to attack defensive linemen very, very well. And for the Seahawks, who need to run the ball more, and who have a guy with Kenneth Walker, who bounces to the second level incredibly good. Once Kenneth Walker's in the second level, he's an elite guy, but he just needs to get there. You get a guard who's able to get him there. And so moving on to the Chargers, this is pretty easily a wide receiver here. Got to go Jackson Smith-Njigba. My player comp for Jackson Smith-Njigba is Keenan Allen. And he's going to the team that Keenan Allen is on. Like Jackson Smith-Njigba, he's able to get, he's a very good route runner. He had an incredible year of production at Ohio State with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Outproduced both of those guys. They were the 11th and 10th overall pick in last year's draft. However, does not have deep field explosiveness. He ran a 4.53 unofficial, but is extremely agile, has great ankle flexibility, runs very smooth routes and fluid routes, So I really like that pick for Justin Herbert, who needs a guy who's going to get open. He needs a guy who's going to get open. Justin Herbert throws into contested coverage all the time when he doesn't need to because he just doesn't have somebody who's going to get open like that. He used to with Keenan Allen, but Keenan Allen's declined so much athletically. Get a guy like Jackson Smith-Njigba who's basically his replacement on my mic. Then the Baltimore Ravens. This is another team who really could benefit from a wide receiver here. They're so thin at the position, and that's one of the main reasons why Lamar Jackson doesn't want to leave, because they don't pay him and they don't give him weapons. So hopefully you can keep him until now. You draft a wide receiver with Jordan Addison. Now he does have some weight concerns. He was 173 at the combine, which is very small. He's going to deal with a lot of press at the NFL level, which is going to inhibit him. But it's another guy who's very agile, who's good in the intermediate range. That's from 10 to 20 yards. And, had another massive year of production with Kenny Pickett at Pittsburgh, transferred to USC, played with Caleb Williams. So playing with two NFL quarterbacks is pretty good. You know how they're going to act in the NFL. And no, he isn't the greatest athlete, 5.87 relative athletic score. But I still see him going in the first round. Moving on to the Vikings. This is pretty much a cornerback slot. I'm going to go with Cam Smith. I've had Cam Smith being mocked to Minnesota for a while. Now, another raw guy out of South Carolina, 6 foot, 188, but athletically, 97th percentile. He has good recovery speed, but still raw out of South Carolina. But does that really matter? Because you now have Brian Flores as your defensive coordinator, and Brian Flores just breeds elite secondaries. Look at Xavier Howard, who some people think maybe is a Cam Smith player comp. I've seen Xavier Howard a little bit. I've only seen it like maybe once out of the 10 that I've seen, but I think that's a good selection for the Vikings, who desperately need secondary. They just really don't have any. Lost Pat Pete as well this offseason. Moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars, I have them going with Darnell Wright. Darnell Wright is the best right tackle in this draft class. Now, if you go watch Darnell Wright's film against Will Anderson, allowed 1 pressure. Will Anderson, by the way, number 4 overall pick in this draft class, allowed 1 pressure to him. This is a guy. Will Anderson's a guy who was a 3-year starter at Alabama, had over 200 pressures. Darnell Wright allowed him to 1. He's another guy with great technique, is proficient against the bull rush, and also the Jaguars, who lost Juwan Taylor over this offseason, need to address that right tackle position. Travis Etienne would benefit so well because he likes to bounce out to that right side. I'm going to go with Darnell Wright there. With the New York Giants, I mean, this has got to be wide receiver, but I don't necessarily love the receivers at the selection here with a guy like Jalen Hyatt, who is a one-trick pony. He's a guy who he really only runs go routes. He doesn't run, or he runs go routes. He doesn't run routes extremely proficiently. He kind of does like a U. If you guys are math majors or like math with nerds, like a logarithmic, it goes like that. But not to like criticize him too much. But then you got a guy like Josh Downs, who is small. He's 5'9", 171. And the Giants already have 2 slot guys. But does Daniel Jones throw the ball deep enough to, have a Jalen Hyatt? I don't know. I mean, they're kind of in a confusing spot for me. I just don't think the receivers are good enough. I don't know if that's a bad word to use, but I don't know if they're good enough to be at this position. Man, I'm a little stumped. You know what? Let's go with the wild. Let's go with the wild card here. All right. So my reasoning maybe for Keely Ringo going to the Giants. I might get a few comments about this of me being wrong, but Giants have Adoree Jackson. That's their good cornerback. But what happened when all the cornerbacks were injured last year? You lose Julian Love this offseason too. You do have Xavier McKinney at safety, but they don't have necessarily a lot of cornerback depth. Adoree Jackson's good. They had good cornerback play last year with their scheme with Mark Whittingdale. But, you know, get an athletic freak like Keely Ringo, who's a 4'3" guy who's 6'2", 205. You're not going to see a lot of guys like that. You know, maybe you're going to have a Tariq Woolen who you get in the 5th round who is like a 6'4", 4'2" guy. But if you're able to mold a guy like Keely Ringo into a solid NFL quarterback or cornerback, he could end up being the cornerback 1 in this draft class. This is, in my opinion, extremely good cornerback class. I like this a lot. Offers a lot of depth. I have like 7 or 8 in my top 50, and New York Giants, I think, could potentially jump on that opportunity, especially if the wide receiver group. You know, I don't think these guys go in the first round. I don't think Jalen Hyatt and Josh Downs are first round guys. Moving on to the Cowboys, I have had this mocked a few times. Going to go with Brian Branch out of Alabama for the Cowboys. I think they could use a Swiss Army knife, a guy in the slot, a guy in the box. You know, Brian Branch, even though he is not a great athlete, he ran a 4.5, or like a low 4.5. He's a extremely good tackler. I can't express that enough. Brian Branch had like 4 missed tackles in 3 years at Alabama. Extremely secure tackler. Really good in the open field as well. And for the Cowboys, who already have a really solid defense, they could use a Swiss Army knife who can play in the slot, who can play in the box, who can maybe even be a linebacker or like a weak side linebacker, and can play over the top a little bit too. Moving on to the Buffalo Bills, I've pretty much had this mocked the whole year, really. Bijan Robinson and the Bills, their biggest weakness is the running game. Go with the running back. Go with Bijan Robinson, who is not... some people have called him a generational prospect. I don't think he is, but he's up there. Bijan Robinson's definitely up there. I have him as an early first-round grade, but the running back tax could definitely hit him. If the Buffalo Bills, you know, maybe want to trade back up in the second, he could be there in the second if, you know, if a team like the Eagles don't take him there. Moving on to the Bengals, like Dawand Jones a lot for them. So, what do you look for in offensive linemen? What do I look for? Technique, size, length. Those are my big 3. Or size and length kind of like the same thing, but, you know, I want you to be, technique, athleticism, length. Those are the big 3 with offensive tackles, especially what I look for. And for Dawand Jones, he meets 2 of those. Or he really excels and is elite at one of them. He is elite length. He's 6'8", really big at 3. He was like 380 at the combine. He was huge. He measured in huge. And then also, dude has an 87-inch wingspan. That's Giannis Antetokounmpo wingspan. And Giannis Antetokounmpo is 2-time NBA MVP, 7 foot tall. So, he has elite length, doesn't have elite athleticism, and is raw with his technique. But the Bengals are allegedly going to cut La'el Collins, who had a horrible year last year, who was injured a lot. Dawand Jones, put him in the right tackle position. You know, you have missed on a lot of offensive tackles, but you signed Orlando Brown Jr. this offseason. Go get another bookend tackle in Dawand Jones, who hopefully you can build up into a really, really solid NFL right tackle. Moving on to the New Orleans Saints, they need defensive tackle or edge rusher. Okay, let's go with Nolan Smith here. The Saints really don't have a lot of defensive. They lost a lot of defensive linemen this offseason. They lost Sky Tootle. They lost Marcus Davenport. They drafted Peyton Turner in 2021, which kind of hasn't really worked out. And they've drafted him, 25th? But Nolan Smith is a guy who offers elite bend. That he jumped over 40 inches, ran a 4.38 in the 40-yard dash. Athletic freak. Now, did have an injury last year that sidelined him out of Georgia, but captain, very favorite in the locker room, like that for the New Orleans Saints. And then the Eagles, I have them, let's go with Brian Breezy. Didn't have a great career at Clemson, had an ACL tear, had family issues, was sick all of last year with a stomach flu, like a long-standing stomach flu or some illness, but looked pretty good at the combine. This is a former 5-star, and for a team that lost Javon Hargrave, go get another really solid defensive tackle that you could mold next to Jordan Davis after Fletcher Cox ends up retiring. And then for the Chiefs, their last selection, I've gone with Jalen Hyatt pretty much every time. If you really want a deep threat that is going to make Patrick Mahomes look really good, and Patrick Mahomes is going to put it on the money every time, so Jalen Hyatt would be that home run hitter for the Kansas City Chiefs. But that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what your team or who your team's going to mock, and I'll see you in the next video.